asking this question because the ANC has morphed from a bygone party of liberation to a party of war, terror, and murderous tendencies. We must recall those massacres when the ANC was warring with the IFP in the 1980s all the way through to the 2000s. The ANC came out as a victor. We thought that this decisive triumph by the ANC would put a permanent stop to people's lives being torn by political violence. Except nothing of that sort happened. Instead, violence continues. Now within the ANC, I want you to think about how many stories you have heard or read online about a ward councillor being slain because there's competition for office, contracts, tenders, and everything in between. In most cases, a ward councillor that ends up being murdered confesses to either their close friends, family, or journalists that somewhere in KZN there's a bullet with their name on it before the atrocious event even takes place.
The Constitution grants all of us the inalienable right to human life, and it's the ANC's duty to protect us from this right being torn apart by means of political violence. If they can't protect their own party members, it's a stretch of imagination to expect them to protect common South Africans from murders of various forms.
What happened to Mandela's plea in King's Park when he told the comrades to let go of pangas, knob carriers, and guns and throw them away in the open seas? For he understood that a comrade's hands cannot serve the nation if they're occupied with lethal weapons. And because of this, the ANC doesn't answer to anyone. No one can erect foundations of accountability and productivity or question their actions, or you will die by a bullet.
The ANC are a disappointed bunch who believe that it's time to eat, always, even at the expense of service delivery in human life. To me, the ANC liberated us from the political injustices of apartheid, but they have never liberated us from the economic injustices of apartheid.
Let's talk about the Moerane report. What does it say? It is a report commissioned between 2011 and 2017. The findings are that the ANC's modus operandi of today is one encapsulated by party members who have veered off greatly from the party's founding principles. Let me explain what that means. You see those tenders and contracts. Founding principles rule that they are for the betterment of the communities in which the party leaders serve, but to the comrades, the tenders and contracts are for themselves and their cronies.
And that's how murders begin. That's how we find ourselves saddled with unfinished community projects like bridges, schools, clinics, etc.
Another final principle of the ANC should be tolerance and democracy, but they don't practice such principles. The same comrades that you see in taxpayer-funded rallies, dressed up, colorful regalia, flashing pricey gadgets in front of downtrodden masses, are murderous monsters who murdered Vusumuzi Dombe in broad daylight in a classroom full of pupils while he was teaching. There's nothing about today's comrades that places them on the same scale of noble characteristics with
the founders must be turning over their graves, and I can wager that if it were up to him, Nelson Mandela would rise from his grave, take over the lines of leadership, and show his oldest politicians how to run a country.
I am a call center team leader, and most of these politicians wouldn't even qualify for a customer service role in my call center. So why are we putting people with such massive skills deficiencies in critical leadership roles that either make or break a country?
It's a grave mistake that we've been making
repeatedly in the past elections, and the country is regressing as a result.
Let's turn to SAPS and ask why they have been largely ineffectual in dealing with this scourge.
It's because they act with fear, favors, and prejudice. They're not well trained, and they spare certain perpetrators of violence from investigations. They don't go where violence or evidence of violence leads them, especially if such evidence leads them to someone that they're scared of, like those notorious taxi overlords, many of whom come from KZN. That's another problem.
In a society, the monopoly of violence should only lie in the hands of the state or the police. But in KZN, hitmen, politicians, and taxi overlords outgun the police when looking at the proliferation of high-caliber weapons.
If we're not careful enough, we'll end up like Mexico, where drug cartels are literally running that country decisively. Back to the ANC, particularly in eThekwini. There is a mafia organization, Amatera Ngokubona, which supposedly espouses the mantra of economic transformation. But when they apply this mantra in practice,
they usually pause at construction sites, demanding expropriation of finances used to fund community projects.
What site demands do is they divert money from much-needed community upliftment projects and channel it to this Dela Ngokubona organization. In that instance, the ANC amounts to nothing more than a syndicate with no purpose, no governing theory, no a clear moral direction. Ever wondered why are so many of our roads fractured with potholes, water infrastructure crossings?
Because municipalities only spend about a tenth of their operating budget on infrastructure maintenance.
Solutions. The first solution is slightly improbable and long-term. We need to vote them out of power. We have already defeated the ANC nationally at the polls. We now need to stretch that defeat to provinces and local regions. Once we vote them out of office,
there won't be tendencies to careful anymore, and violence will cease to be the political capital.
The second solution would be to transform the hostels.
Just do away with these things.
They're nothing more than apartheid institutions that hatch and incubate violence. If I had an opportunity to have a quick sit down with a high-profile ANC party member and ask them if they see any possibility of the party steering back to its founding paradigms where South Africa's democracy rests on judicial independence, rule of law, free media, upholding individual rights, responsive governance that fuels positive policy competitiveness,
they might try to be optimistic about the party's perpetuation well into the next few decades.
But let us be honest.
We've had it with the ANC.
For the country to move forward, we need to break away from this organization, and the fact that they hit below 50% in May 2024 is a great start. 2029 should be their last kick of a dying horse,
where we officially bury them into the soil of history and they become a thing of the past forever. After the ANC is gone, we must usher in a period of democracy where expectations for change, redistribution, and accountability are high.
Not this thing of today's ANC's comrades, indicating right but they turn left.